Machines, built to carry vast loads. To handle extremes of heat and cold. To exert enormous force. Or perform the most delicate functions. They can complete the tasks of 100 workers, or make the job of one person so much simpler. But they're not foolproof. Through human error or duress, they can also break down, deteriorate, need parts replacing, cause accidents if not regularly maintained. And so, to minimize the risk to personal health and safety, not just for those working with equipment, but also for people living and working nearby, we have PURE, the Provision and Use of Work Equipment Regulations 1998. They place the emphasis where it belongs, on risk to personal health and safety. So, all employers and self-employed with any machinery, appliance, apparatus, tool or installation being used at work must follow these regulations, as must any plant hire company with control of work equipment. If you're starting, stopping, programming, setting or transporting, repairing, modifying, maintaining and servicing, or just cleaning the equipment, you are legally bound by the regulations and personally liable. When you're choosing your equipment, be it large or small, make sure you know what you're getting. It needs to have been made or adapted to suit the job at hand, and you must use it only for the purposes and under the conditions for which it's suitable, and ensure employees always use the right tool for the job.
All right, Derek, I've got a hand over paperwork for you.
Good, it seems to be okay from this side of it. Can
I, good. Yes. There you are.
Thank you very much.
Right, I'll give you a copy of that then.
Don't take on any used equipment unless it's accompanied by physical evidence that any last inspection required under the regulations has actually been done. And don't forget to consider the risks to health and safety, not just for those using the equipment, but for others working on the site as well. Safety first. Equipment produced after December 1992 also needs to comply with community directives, covering a whole range of health and safety issues. Once you've got the equipment, work practices and authorizations need to be clear and concise. Everyone using the equipment, plus supervisors and managers, must be adequately trained for health and safety purposes. On how to use the equipment, the risks that can arise, and the precautions you should take. And knowing where these are is not a bad thing. Your work practices need to allow for every contingency, and you need to complete a written risk assessment using the principles of risk prevention. Avoid, evaluate those you can't avoid, adapt, replace, and combat at source. Your work systems need to ensure no one's in any danger when the equipment starts up. People may need time and opportunity to get out of harm's way. And you need to know that no one's at risk when you operate the controls. The CCTV system here is vital. You may need suitable warnings when your work equipment is about to start or move. Your risk assessment will have established any requirements here. You need to have relevant information close at hand. Supervisors and managers alike need instructions on how to use the equipment, including conditions and methods of use. Information on foreseeable abnormal situations and what to do if they happen, and also any conclusions to be drawn from past experience in using the equipment. Something that should be included in your risk assessment. If the equipment involves a specific risk, it should be well signed and only used by designated staff who are carefully trained. First aid equipment should be well to hand. And of course the equipment must always be kept in efficient working order and good repair, using good maintenance management techniques. The actual task of maintenance can pose new risks in itself, and you should take any extra precautions needed to keep it safe. Ideally, the work equipment should be built or adapted so that any risky maintenance can be done with the equipment shut down. Keep maintenance logs up to date and make sure repairs, modifications and services are only done by competent people.
Excuse me, mate. Can you bring me down on auxiliary power? All my power's off up here.
Yeah, okay, mate.
Safety is one area where it pays to be a control freak. Not just with normal operating controls, but with overriding backup emergency controls as well. The level of control will depend on the risk, and you may need a hierarchy of controls, one overriding the other up to an immediate emergency stop. There are some fundamental rules for your normal operating control systems. Controls must not obstruct emergency buttons. Plan for failures and faults. For example, what happens if there's a blackout? If something fails, is there a spare part available? How is the equipment started? Is it by one or two people? What are the conditions for bringing the machine to a halt? For example, does that require power? What operating conditions will increase the risk, say going faster? Emergency controls must only be operated by a deliberate action. And as part of your safe work practice, make sure it'll be safe to turn your equipment back on again after shutdown and know who has responsibility. Where the safety of your work equipment hinges on the way it's installed, it needs to be inspected, and any problems fixed before it's used. Your risk assessment will determine how often your equipment needs to be inspected. Should anything out of the ordinary happen that might affect the equipment, inspect it as a matter of priority. The extent of an inspection depends on the potential risks and can include visual checks, functional checks and testing. Record your inspection results and keep them until the next one. When it comes time to sell off, lend out or use any work equipment outside its normal undertaking, don't let it leave you without physical evidence of its last mandatory inspection. For equipment on the move, there's a whole new set of risks. As fun as it might look, riding on equipment is out unless it's guaranteed safe. At fault here, the rider and driver. So we must minimize the risks. If your mobile equipment is likely to roll over, stabilize it, ensuring wooden blocks are used if the ground is at all soft. Or make sure there's a clearance for riders if it overturns. Rollover bars make sure it can't fall any further than its side. If it could crush anyone by rolling over, make sure there's a suitable restraining system for the operator and that they wear them. Forklift trucks should be adapted or equipped to absolutely minimize risk. But of course, with all these examples, the preventative measures should not increase the overall risk to safety or make it too hard to operate the equipment. Self-propelled equipment like this dumper truck must keep risk to a minimum whilst it's moving and have adequate brakes for slowing down and stopping. Also, make sure the driver can see as well as possible, and if not, provide CCTV equipment or mirrors such as those we saw earlier. You need to guard against crushing or impact, including collision, if you have more than one rail-mounted machine on the same track. The equipment needs a brake and stop with an emergency override that's either readily accessible or automatic. And you have to make sure that it can't be started by an unauthorized person. If there's any risk of fire on any machinery, it'll need to have its own firefighting equipment on board, unless you already have some very close by. If you have, sign it well. Chainsaws are particularly dangerous, and you need to be appropriately trained to use them.
Right, first of all, I'm just going to go through the features of the machine. Down this side, we have the start-stop switch, you have your choke, and you have your main trigger. That's something we'll cover a little later when we start it.
The training needs to have covered the dangers arising from the chainsaw itself.
Right, I'd like to just show you the chain. Very important that the chain is tensioned properly at all times. Now, the way you can tell it, you should be able to see 4 teeth. See the bottom of the teeth when you lift it up like that? Make sure
The importance of chain tension. Training should also cover dangers arising from the job for which you're using the chainsaw, and the importance of fuel, oil, and the safety brake. And lastly, the precautions you need to take to control and protect yourself from these dangers.
spats, which go over your boots, over trousers, a jacket, and finally...
However, never use a chainsaw as a quick and easy tool when an electric or handsaw will do the job much safer. Employers need to minimize risks of equipment sending out projectiles that could injure workers. For example, if an abrasive wheel were to burst. Prevention in the first place is preferable. Abrasive wheels should be run within the specified speed limits, and appropriate guards should also be provided. These will catch any fragments of the wheel that might fly off if it does burst, and they should also prevent contact with the wheel itself during operation. And even when not in use, there are still dangers with abrasive wheels. Changing the wheel requires the apparatus to be turned off and isolated, and protective gloves to be used throughout the change. And ensure that bolt is fully tightened during reassembly in accordance with manufacturer's instructions. Safety is the prime concern, with responsibility firmly fixed with both the employer and the operator. There are a few final questions to be asked. Do you need to clamp or stabilize the equipment or some part of it so as not to pose a risk? Is the area where the equipment's to be used lit well enough for the work to be done safely? And is the lighting itself suitable? Is the equipment clearly marked with any safety precautions? And is the equipment, its parts, or anything produced, used, or stored in it either very hot or cold? If so, it needs protection to prevent anyone being burnt, scalded, or seared. Pure's regulations have been introduced to minimize the risk to the personal health and safety of those working with equipment and those working nearby. But provided good work practices are in place, within the parameters of the regulations, risks should be kept to a minimum, so that the machines continue to work with us and not against us.